Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring and my second video looking at the Godtear starter sets. In the last video we took a look at the Eternal Glade starter set and I talked a bit about the game and I also talked a bit about what I liked and didn't like about the way they had packaged the starter sets and how I felt that I was compelled to purchase both starter sets. In this video, we're going to take a look at the other starter set that I purchased, the Borderlands, and then at the end of the video, I'm just going to go through a few things that I like and dislike about the game in general. So let's dive into the box. The Borderlands starter set is my least favourite of the two. I find the factions inside the box slightly less interesting. I really like the quartzlings in the Eternal Glade set who are controlled by Nia, who creates them out of the rocks. And obviously, I like a bit of the old undead skeleton action that Morrigan brings to the table. The Borderlands includes what appears to be some kind of knight faction led by Titus, and then we get some humongous elves led by Finvar. So I find the factions slightly less interesting, but also the miniatures in this set I do not think are as good. They're good individually, but looked at together as a set, they look a little bit odd. It looks like miniatures from several different games have been thrown together. When you open the box, as with Eternal Glade, you are greeted with a beautifully illustrated game board. It's double-sided. One side has art that is themed to this particular set and the factions included. That's this side here. And then the reverse is a more generic wilderness desert wasteland, which is actually exactly the same piece of artwork that is on the reverse of the board from the other starter sets. The boards are really nicely illustrated, but they are entirely cosmetic. None of this stuff has any in-game feature. There is no terrain cover or anything like that. The second thing in the box is your rulebook, and if you watched my unboxing of the Eternal Glade set, you will notice that this rulebook has different artwork, and in fact, that is continued throughout the whole rulebook. All of the examples, all of the card art, and everything else is taken from the factions that come in the box. So, although the actual rules set is exactly the same, the scenarios in the back are exactly the same. Everything is the same in terms of the content, but all of the artwork is different. You get a set of 10 custom dice. These are quite chunky, nicely etched with faces with 1 success and faces with 2 successes and faces that are blank. You get 3 dashboards for 3 factions. Although there are only 2 factions in the box, the standard game size for this particular game is to have 3 champions on each side. So generally you will need 6 of these to play a standard sized game, which means you do really need the contents of 2 starter sets, and even then you will need to purchase 2 additional factions. This is something that I talked about in my previous video. You get 3 punch boards of tokens. These punch boards are exactly the same ones that come in the Eternal Glade set. They have the Godtear objective hexes, which are the only hexes that will be put onto the board during play. There are no hexes for terrain. We have the buffs and debuff tokens. We have a load of wound tokens, and then we have turn trackers and faction tokens. And then we have just 6 cards. That's 3 cards per faction. 2 cards for the champion and 1 card for the champion's minions. Nicely illustrated, and they are double-sided because of the way that the game works. And that's it for the accessories, the extra bits and bobs you need to play the game. The rest of the contents of the box are the miniatures themselves. So we have come to the Badlands. This is the reverse side of the game board, and we're going to take a look at the miniatures. And individually, I really like these miniatures, but as a set, I am not so keen. I mentioned in my previous video that I don't like so much the way that they have scaled the miniatures, because what they have done is they have given each faction a huge leader figure. Here is Titus. Titus is the leader of the Glory Seekers, and he's a big old chap. Very nice miniature. There is some good detailing on him, a little bit soft on the armor, and there is a little bit of a bend in the sword that will need to be straightened out with hot water. But a nice miniature and a good stance. I do like the strong pose on him. But he is extra large. The reason being, the in-universe explanation for this is that as mortals absorb energy from the Godtears, which are crystallized essence of the gods, they get stronger, but they also get bigger. So this means that each faction will be led by an oversized miniature. It's kind of an excuse to make oversized miniatures and also make them stand out on the battlefield, I think. But it does lend to slightly awkward scaling, because Titus's minions are also humans in armor, but they look like this, and it just seems odd when you've got this huge man. He's a man. Your brain reads that as a human miniature, and then this is a human miniature, but this is kind of like the actual scale that a human would be, and this guy's just been chowing down on Godtear, so he's a big boy now. So it looks a little bit weird. I mean, the miniatures themselves are very nice, but compared to each other, there's a weird scaling thing. Things get even worse when you compare these miniatures to Finvar's miniatures, because I guess elves in the Godtear setting are bigger than humans anyway. Here we have an elf. This is actually my favourite of the elf miniatures. Really nice, really cool pose. Got a sort of Assassin's Creed type look going on to it. But if we compare him to our human, we can see there is a huge discrepancy in the size. This suggests to me that elves are supposed to be way bigger. Although, it should be noted, there's quite a bit of variation between the size of the humans in Titus's forces anyway. This one is clearly much bigger than this one. These two are generally the biggest in the set. And slightly better scaled to the elf, although still standing a little bit short. But then this guy doesn't really seem like the tallest elf. It's slightly down to the pose that he is in and his bent knees, I guess. But this guy generally seems bigger. And of course, because they're bigger in general than the humans, Finvar, their leader, is extra massive. As you can see, Finvar is a very big boy. He's so big, he tells Titus to go home and eat some more Weetabix. And if you were interested to see how these miniatures compare to the scale of other ranges, we can see that this Glory Seeker here from Godtear towers over the Reaper Wizard. And the Glory Seeker is actually giving Slambo a run for his money there, in terms of size. And as for the elves, towering over Slambo here. So not surprising to see that compared to the scale of the Reaper Wizard, absolutely huge. Regardless, here is Titus, our yellow hero. In games of Godtear, there are 4 different types of hero and they are colour coded. There are green heroes who are shapers who will get bonus points for placing their banners. There are red heroes like Morrigan from the Eternal Glade starter set who are slayers and they specialise in knocking out heroes. Yellow heroes like Titus here, they specialise in killing minions, in taking out foot troops, and will score bonus points for taking out minions. Titus has 5 foot troops under his command. And as you can see, all of these foot troops are unique sculpts. Something I do like about this game, every single miniature in the box is unique. Every faction also gets a banner, which is a unique sculpt again. Titus gets this lovely flag, which he can place on objectives during the game to score victory points. Next up, we have our big boy Finvar. Finvar is a blue Guardian champion. Guardians have skills that are focused on defense, and he will score bonus victory points for keeping his banner in play at the end of the round. Finvar has 3 elves who are not particularly dynamic miniatures, but they do have a very strong look. And Finvar's banner is a sword stuck into the ground with tendrils and vines growing all around it. So that's it, that is everything in the Borderlands box set, and having talked about it and talked about Eternal Glade, there's not really much more I can say about Godtear at this moment until I have got it to the table, got some experience playing with it, and I can really formulate how I feel about the game. But I thought I would end this video with just a little roundup of my initial impressions of 3 things I think are good about the game and 3 things that I think are bad about the game. We'll get the bad stuff out of the way first. Obviously, I'm not keen on the scaling of the miniatures. I don't like the oversized champions so much, but also I just feel like the scaling is slightly off between factions, and it does make it look like when you've got the miniatures on the table, it feels like they're miniatures from different games. The second bad thing is I have a concern, I have a reservation that the game might be over simple. It's a very slick design, there's not a lot of moving parts. Each faction, you have all of the rules you need for that faction on just 3 cards, and each faction is always just one champion who has some always activated abilities, a one-time ultimate ability, and then their abilities that they can use during the 2 phases of the game, the plot phase or the clash phase. And then they have their one type of minion, which again have set skills that are available in the plot phase and the clash phase. It's all very simple, and there's nothing on the board other than objective markers. There's no terrain, there's no cover, there's no elevation. There's also no cards to change how your heroes work. There are no gear cards, there are no upgrade cards, although there is a downloadable PDF online for a sort of campaign type system where you can gradually give new skills to your heroes, but that's not in the core experience, and I think it was something that was originally a Kickstarter thing. But generally, under normal play, there's nothing to change the way the heroes work, and there's nothing on the battlefield to shape your plans other than the objectives and the positioning of the enemy units. So there is a reservation that it might be a slightly too simple thing that is going to start to feel stale eventually. And that concern ties into the third bad thing I'm going to mention, which is that the variability of the gameplay is tied into buying more miniatures. Every time you play with a faction, that faction is going to play the same way. The champion will always have the same skills, it will always have the same ultimate ability, it will always have the same unit of minions available to it. The minions will always have the same skills, they will always arrive on the battlefield in the same number. Everything will always be the same when you use a specific faction. Over time, if you want variability, it's not like you can go, okay, well, I'm going to load out my champion with different weapons, or I'm going to bring a different unit with that champion. You have to buy a new faction pack with a new champion and a new set of units, and then you have to combine those in different ways. So the variability of the gameplay over time is going to come from buying more miniatures. That is a concerning model for any game, because is it the case that the game has been designed around shifting more plastic? Is it the case that they have specifically designed the game to say all of your variability, all of your long-term gameplay comes from the fact that you need to own all the factions? Because it's going to be exciting if you've got lots of factions, because you're picking up to 3 for a standard sized game, and if you've got a whole bunch of them available, you've got a load of options for how you can build your army. If you haven't got all of those factions, army options are limited, and things are going to play the same each time. But not wishing to flip and flop too much, some of those bad things that I've talked about could potentially be seen as good things. I think that having a simple game that is very accessible is a good thing. I've got a lot of games that I don't get to play that often because they require a certain level of investment to get good at the game, to know the game, and to shape your armies and things like that. But in this game, you just pick 3 champions with their units, throw them on the battlefield, and just see what you can do with them. There's no hand of cards to worry about, so you don't have any gotcha moments. There's no moment where your opponent's suddenly going to throw down a card and go, haha, I've got you. There's no hidden information. No hidden information means that I can more easily solo this, but it also means that all of the potential moves that you can make are on the table for your opponent to see. It's going to come down to how you use those units. It's not going to come down to what trick did you pull. And that can be a good thing. That can be a refreshing thing when you can see across the table exactly what your opponent might do. So if they do get you with something, it's your fault because they've probably telegraphed what that potential plot is going to be and you've missed it. So that's a good thing. The second good thing is I actually do like the way that the factions work together, how you build your forces. I like the fact that you don't have to choose a faction and stick with it and keep buying units that are the same. You know, it's refreshing to go, well, okay, I want to have some elves in my army, but I also want a great big undead lich queen, and I would also quite like some dwarves. It's different than a lot of games where it's just a case of, right, you're elves, so you've got elf units, you might have a couple of allies, but you know, you're picking an elf army, so you're playing elves. I like that you have that variety and you can mix up what you're doing, and your forces are going to look weird and mishmashed. And I also like the fact that because every faction can play with every other faction, each new faction you buy is exponentially more useful, because each new faction that you purchase can work with any faction you already have, which creates more combinations, which creates more value in everything else that you've purchased previously. There is actually a reward for buying more units because everything becomes more valuable as a result. The final thing that I'm going to say that I like, at least in theory, is the element of the two phases of this particular game. What will happen is at the start of a round you will have the plotting phase where all of the forces on one side will move and then all of the forces on the other side will move. And then you go into a clash phase. And during the clash phase, it becomes an I go, you go structure where one person will move a unit or a champion and then the opponent will move a unit or a champion and you go back and forth. This works in conjunction with the cards, which are double-sided, and you flip them depending on what phase of the game you're in. So here we have Titus, and this is the plot side of the card. You can see the plot icon, and he has specific skills that are available to him. And then, when you go into the clash phase of the game, you flip the card over, and he has different skills available to him. This is a really interesting concept. It reminds me a little bit of games like The Duke, and to a lesser extent things like Shogi and Navia Drap. In the Duke, every time you move a piece you flip it over, and the next time you activate that piece it has a completely different movement pattern to it. And games like Navia Drap, you can during the game upgrade your pieces and you flip the base of the piece and they gain a different type of movement or a different skill. So I get little bits of elements of those sort of games in this and the card flipping mechanism. Overall, despite some misgivings about miniatures and the way that the game has been packaged, I am really excited about this game in general. I'm really looking forward to getting some games in. I'm going to try and teach it to my daughter, who is 9, and hopefully we're going to have some fun with it. And if people are interested in seeing more about this game, do please let me know in the comments. I do read all of the comments. I respond whenever I can, and it's good to know what people are liking, what people would like to see more of. It really helps me to structure what I'm doing with the channel. But that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have liked it, please consider pressing the like button. If you really liked it, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.